C.F. Martin and Company, established 1833. Quite remarkable. The history of the acoustic guitar in America really is the history of Martin guitars to a very large extent, at least through the bulk of the 19th century. And then just an explosion of different styles in the 20th century. But the 19th century was when, early 19th century, guitar mania in Europe crossed the Atlantic, along with C.F. Martin. And in that era, the guitar was a very small instrument, a gut-strung instrument, essentially a parlor classical guitar. And the instrument was extremely popular throughout the 19th century, only to be somewhat supplanted later in the era, towards the 1870s, by the banjo and the mandolin. And Martin were indeed making mandolins in the late 19th century and continue to do so in the 20th. As the guitars got bigger, so it was really the search for volume was an important factor. And by the 1920s, they were being strung with steel strings. A lot of that came out of the influence of the Hawaiian music that America was exposed to in 1916 at the World's Fair, when they discovered ukulele's slide guitar for the very first time. This instrument is Acacia Koa, and this came over from Hawaii and was used fairly extensively by Martin in the early part of the 20th century. This also has a Spanish cedar neck, which was very common on Martin guitars up until about 1920, when it became fairly unavailable. You still have it characteristic of classical guitars of all different manufacturers, but at that time, the Spanish cedar got replaced by mahogany, which is a slightly different quality of sound. But this instrument is an OM, an orchestra model. Essentially what happened in the late 1920s was that a banjo player named Perry Bechtel went to Martin and asked for a guitar that would give him access to the higher frets. And so, allowing for the fact this guitar has a cutaway, which was not typical of that era. But prior to that point, the body would really meet at the 12th fret, would meet the neck at the 12th fret. But now they had cut off a couple of frets worth of body to allow for a 14 fret neck. And this is really the beginning of kind of the modern guitar with the 14 fret neck. Perry Bechtel, as it turned out, was perhaps the motivation for the orchestra model guitar, where they took a triple aught size instrument and with a long scale, something that was friendly to the banjo players, with the expectation that it would get used as an orchestral, like a jazz band guitar, was not to be. The jazz players really didn't go in that direction, but the West Coast cowboys did, the Roy Rogers and the Gene Autrys, and the OM became very popular amongst those players. And then kind of fell out of favor for many years until at one point it really came back into circulation as a fingerstyle guitar, because this body size and depth, string spacing 1 3/4 inches at the nut, in my case 2 1/4 inches at the saddle, which is a little less than the vintage width, but a little more than a standard modern width, all gives an extra accessibility for playing fingerstyle guitar. So the OM kind of became like a standard for fingerstyle guitar players. And I'm very fortunate that through my relationship with Martin Guitars over the last 10 years, I've been able to develop a signature model in various incarnations. In fact, the very first one that I did with them was this one that I've been using for teaching. This is mahogany. An OM18 with a mahogany neck also. Same essential dimensions, Adirondack spruce top. My just preferred configuration all round. And the reason I use this for teaching, purely and simply, beyond the fact that mahogany makes a terrific studio guitar, has dots on the fingerboard. And you would not like it if I was giving you lessons without the dots, because it just helps you locate. So this guitar in particular just really turned out to be a very cool instrument. And so much so that it spawned a series of signature guitars. We subsequently did it in Brazilian rosewood. Brazilian rosewood is a very, very, now of course an endangered species, so it's not readily available. And I find with Brazilian, it really lends itself well to flat picking. Has a lot of articulation for fingerstyle, but almost an arch top in the kind of decay and clarity of attack that it has. But because Brazilian became so hard to get, for a brief period we were able to get Madagascar Rosewood. And this has a similar look. This one, that was in standard tuning. I have this in Dagad now. Very rich sound. A little more penetration and clarity than one would get with Indian rosewood, but a little less so than Brazilian rosewood. And a very powerful room-filling instrument that I was touring with for some time. But most recently, I came to the conclusion that Koa, for me, had all the elements of the warmth and woodiness of mahogany, the richness of rosewood, the clarity, for example, of maple, but in a very light and articulate instrument that gave me the qualities that I really, for recording and for performance. And this seems to be where I've settled at this point, is with this Koa, Acacia Koa, and it's gorgeous too. But looks aside, I really like the tone and the articulation that it lets me really find those kinds of different voices that live inside the guitar. So I hope you enjoy my lessons. I hope you've learned a little bit about guitar woods from this brief introduction with Martin guitars, and here you go.